do you want to get started, Mike and Noel?
Yeah, I think that'd be great. It's at 4:05, so. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I know we haven't met in a while and things have been, you know, very in flux for all of us. So we really appreciate your time, and we want to make sure we use your time wisely and that we think about what is the best focus right now for our work group. And we met with Matt and Tizzy this morning to really discuss that. So since we have some new people, we do want to take some time at the beginning to share out some information about what our focus is and what we've done so far, just to regroup. And then we have some tasks we'd like to get through today, mostly focused on getting everyone's input about the best way to implement the recommendations that we've already decided on, and the stakeholders, different stakeholders' input, how to get that. We have some people with us today who can provide some different stakeholder input that we haven't had yet. And then there's also some that we're missing that we want to try to do in our follow-up steps. So again, just coming up with some details of how we can actually go about implementing these recommendations effectively to create real change. Cool. So as usual, just mute yourself when you're not talking. We'd love it if you use the chat function as much as possible so that we can really engage everybody. And when speaking, identify yourself. We will be using the breakout rooms during this meeting as well. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat function. Okay, so our welcome and introductions. Kind of go through briefly. I'm Noelle Picara. I'm the Arts Integration Specialist at Kuumba Academy, and I'm the co-chair of this work group.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Representative Mike Smith of the Hockessin Pike Creek area. I'm also the co-chair of the Educators working group, and I apologize if you hear my kids in the background when I unmute. Fran, why don't we, I'll try to navigate here. Fran, why don't you go next, introduce yourself?
Sure, Fran O'Malley. I work at the Institute for Public Administration and providing support for the work group.
Dr. Bunting?
I'm Susan Bunting. I'm the Secretary of Education. I'm not sure that I'm an official part of this group, but I tag along each time anyway. Thanks for having me.
Jim?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jim Simmons. I'm the newly appointed Chief Equity Officer for the State of Delaware and Department of Education.
Awesome. And Jim, maybe you can, after we're done introductions real quick, just briefly kind of talk us through that role a little bit, if you don't mind, because I know it shifted a little.
It did.
I think I saw Margie on there, yes?
Yes, Margie Lopez-Waite from Aspida Academy. Thank you.
Awesome. I think I saw Kelly, yes?
Hi, I'm Kelly Sheretz. I'm with the Institute for Public Administration, and I provide support to this work group as well as the full consortium.
Okay. All right. How about Shelley?
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Shelley Rouser, and I am the chairperson for education programs at Delaware State University.
Thank you. Abigail?
I'm Abigail Armstrong. I work for the Institute for Public Administration.
Danye?
Hi, everyone. I'm Danye. Danye Woods. I am an educator at Shortledge Academy within the Red Clay School District. And I'm transitioning right now to my home, so that's why you guys don't see me just yet.
Okay. Senator Lockman, you on there? I see her, but I know she's doing 2 different meetings, so. Maureen McGurk?
Hi, everybody. I'm Maureen McGurk. I'm an elementary school teacher in the Brandywine School District for 10 years now. I've been teaching 23 years total. I also have a Master of Public Administration, so I have a lot of interest in government and public policy. So I was excited to be invited to be on the committee.
Thank you. Autumn Green.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Autumn Green. I am on the teaching faculty team for Relay Graduate School of Education here in Delaware. I'm happy to just weigh in with any experience I have, given all the teachers that I teach across the state.
Awesome, thank you. Who else? Did I miss anybody else?
Representative Smith?
Yes. Oh,
Hi, it's Matt Den. I'm on the telephone, old school.
I missed my own constituent. Sorry about that, Matt.
I forgive you.
Thanks for joining us tonight. Jim, can real quick, before we move on, can you just talk us through your role a little bit and kind of what your focus area will be?
So obviously the role has changed, but it hasn't lost any responsibility. I'm still working with schools within the city and the MOU with Christina School District. If you're not aware, they have rebuilt their, actually they rebuilt their board and their top level cabinet members, new superintendent. They're in the process of hiring an assistant, and then they've filled their CFO and their HR, director of HR, human resources. So I think my work and time commitment there will decrease, but still be involved with them as well. And then their board has turned over almost completely with only one member after tonight, probably, who has been around through this transition of what Christina has, who Christina has been and what that board has represented. So, but in this new role, we're overseeing this equity work. I have a new team that includes Monique Martin, who was in our educator support group for DOE. She slid or transitioned to my team, and in her work group, we have two teachers who work as contracted agents. Jenny Furcucci, who is the former state teacher of the year, I think 2 years ago. Don't hold me to it, I've been hitting the head a lot. And then Chantel Ashford, who works for Indian River, both English teachers and both into social justice. I think actually Jenny teaches a class of social justice. And while the equity looks different for every district and charter, we're trying to formulate it around three tenets that each district and charter, we're going to ask at some point, have a equity lead that will participate in professional development and opportunities to learn and grow equity. But their framework will be based on the data that comes out of their schools or their districts, because equity sounds like it's all the same, but it's different for each district that and what your inequities may be. And we're asking data to drive it. And then the third tenet that we're going to use to drive the work is to make sure that we include student voice. A lot of times we believe the adults know what's going on and the kids have the unspoken truth. So those are the three things we're going to use to drive the work. Monique brings a ton of contacts that she had from the work before, including our work with the Delaware Valley Consortium of Educational Equity out of UPenn. One of our goals is to hopefully bring our own consortium to Delaware. I believe New Jersey and Pennsylvania have their own as well. And so we would like to do that. So we're just slowly meeting with districts to continue the work that she has, but at a deeper dive. And so that's where we are early on.
Awesome, thanks, Jim. And I believe Ray just joined us on the phone. Is that right, Ray? I think that's Ray's phone.
Yeah.
Oh.
I'm gonna have to stay muted though.
That's okay. I just wanted to make sure and welcome you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
And Senator Lockman does say hi. She is on 2 meetings, but she's listening and lurking in. She used the word lurking. So, all right, we are gonna, I guess, move on. Oops, past this one. Kelly,
The minutes.
did you send the minutes out to everybody ahead of time?
I did. I apologize. They were this morning. I meant to send them earlier, but I got held up.
If everyone hasn't had a chance, or for those that are in front of their computer, if you haven't and you have a chance, I'll just give you a minute to kind of review. If you haven't, check your email box, and then I'll accept the motion to approve the minutes. Anybody's had a chance, I'd love a motion to approve the minutes.
This is Danielle. I make a motion to approve the minutes from the March 23rd meeting.
Thanks, Danielle. Do we have a second?
Jim Simmons, I second the motion.
Thanks, Jim. All in favor, just say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, cool.
Any
Awesome.
sustaining?
Any sustaining? Oh, good, Kelly. Thank you. Appreciate you keeping me on my governance. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Okay. All right, so just to kind of review the charge of the group, we were tasked with reviewing local data, which we did a lot in the beginning, and best practice research to create recommendations for the recruitment, retention, and equitable allocation of diverse, high-quality educators in the city of Wilmington. I would like to give our whole group a shout out because we actually did finish our work pre-COVID. So great job to everybody. We had a really tight time crunch and you all did a really fantastic job. I also want to make sure we thank our crew from the university because they did a great job pulling all that information together. And I did want to thank Secretary Bunting because DOE did a great job in supplying a lot of data as well that I think I found extremely helpful during the meeting. So thank you. Sorry, I forget what slide is next.
I'm not good at reading the screen, and sorry. So this is just a reminder of what the consortium came up with at the beginning with all of the equity definition. A lot of the beginning slides that we're going through today are just reminders of where we are in the process and then how we're going to move it along.
Yep, and something to remind folks that Noelle just put in the chat is we are trying to find more ways to include student stakeholders in the group and get their perspectives. So it's an action item for tonight. So, you know, if you can just put your thinking caps on to think through ways to best engage them at this time, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I just want to give us the opportunity to be able to put that in the chat the whole time so that we can take that with us if you have any ideas. So we can go over the decision-making model of how we're making decisions here with the consortium. As you can see in our work group, as Mike just said, we already did a round of meetings from December until February where we did some stakeholder engagement, local data, looked at best practices, and we made the recommendations. Those recommendations were approved by the full consortium. And we are looking again, returning to the stakeholder engagement because since with COVID, we were not able to make the policy changes in legislative session that we were planning to. We wanted to use this opportunity, I'm saying opportunity is like a growth mindset, to take some more time to engage more stakeholders because in that 2-month window that we made the recommendations, we had to do that really quickly. And we didn't really have time to talk to teachers from all different backgrounds and students and families. So we want to be able to tweak the recommendations as needed and then also really think about the plans of implementation of those recommendations with the time that we have. So this is kind of our task, determining the recommendations. So tonight we're going to prioritize those recommendations, especially given the current situation. Stakeholder engagement. So any ideas for that, please bring to the table. And identifying the ways that we can make real change in the recruitment and retention of educators. Now, we do want to be careful with this last one as far as responses to COVID that are relevant. We are not involved in implementing direct services right now during COVID or doing like quick responses. So we want to be careful not to get too overwhelmed with that part of it. But obviously what's happening during COVID may be highlighting some of the inequities, and then we can use that as data to help us with implementing the recommendations.
And to Noel's point and to our group, when in our conversation with Senator Lockman and Matt earlier, you know, we've already have our recommendations. Now we kind of need to put some teeth into them so they can help drive them forward and what it could look like. So some of the directives could be, you know, doing further research on putting together what a model or plan could look like, cost of those things, and those types of things versus, you know, coming up with anything new, and also just being a value added to the school districts, not adding anything more to their plates as they're dealing with the response side of all this.
So this is just really quickly, there were a few questions that were raised at the last meeting. We wanted to show that we have been working on pulling the information, but this isn't where we're going to put our focus today. We can come back to these at the next meeting as well, but we just wanted to give you just a quick preview, excuse me, of what there is. We have pulled from the Delaware Department of Education's educator mobility data. It was asked, what does retention look like in high needs versus non-high needs schools? Sorry, I can't fully see the whole thing. So this is just looking at all levels of educator retention rates from Newcastle County, state non-high needs schools, schools with throughout the state that are designated as high needs from the department. Then looking at Newcastle County high needs schools and focusing in on City of Wilmington schools, which most of them fall into the high needs. And then we also looked at the retention rates by district, by their non-high needs and high needs schools. So that is looking at the mobility that we were talking about. We can go even deeper for the next meeting. It was asked, what schools do Wilmington residents attend? So here's a list of all of the schools. You can see many of them are in Newcastle County. If you go down to Appoquinimink, Newark Charter Schools, not surprising, or is, I'm not sure how they get there, but I'll leave it at that. But this is a list of the schools that they attend based on the 18-19 data that we currently have.
Are there any questions about that from the group at all?
Can't see the chat box if they're over.
And Kelly, are you going to share these slides with everybody by email?
Yes, I will send them out after the meeting as a
That way
follow-up.
everybody can go through that data. And the reason we were looking at this really is because we want to make sure that in the terms of equity, that if we make some changes, that we don't end up sending resources again to schools that already have the most resources. So we had a lot of questions about what does high needs actually mean, which schools are actually in the city, and which schools are actually attended by students in the city, so that we're not just making some blanket statement where schools that have a lot of resources are getting more and we're continuing inequity.
And then there was another question that came up at the last meeting, looking at what are high quality educators, because that was in our mandate and task. We also talked about changing that word to, blanking on the name, changing it, removing the high quality, but educators that have the potential to really make the change. So I will send this slide out. There's a lot on this slide, but we looked at what national definitions are, what some of the different states have done, and then what Delaware has as well. Give you all a minute to look at it, and then I'm just going to keep us going.
Yeah, I remember our discussion around this was just how we fine tune our exact definition of go and attack this programmatically. So,
Whoop, sorry. All right. So these are just really quickly, I did send out this morning a list of, not a list, the document that Mike was and Noel have referenced with all the recommendations in them, knowing that we will be zooming in on a few to really make them meaty and have action steps. Again, this is just the slide that Noel went through earlier about the goal of going through these. So the first two recommendations that fall under here, sorry. Recruiting high quality, diverse candidates. One was develop a grow your own program. We suggested that the higher eds should create partnerships with the already established teacher academies, and districts should further develop and advertise future teacher programs and other like programs. And again, I am summarizing these for right now. The other is strengthen the teacher pipeline, expand and increase funding for scholarship and tuition forgiveness programs. P20 can either create or expand channels of communication between the higher eds and LEAs. Expansion and development, expansion or development of year-long teacher residencies. And we know there is some work going on in many of these already. The next bucket that the recommendations fell under was retaining high quality, diverse candidates. One recommendation was come up and address financial incentives / packages that we can create to bring teachers into these schools. Then another was create a whole school professional learning package offered in high need schools within the city of Wilmington. And then supporting a diverse teacher workforce. We talked about LEAs, creating cohorts of teachers and administrators of color for the purpose of preparing the next generation of teachers and administrators. And then increased efforts should be made to recruit individuals of color and individuals with diverse backgrounds to these positions and support these individuals while they are working within schools. So this is a very high level overview. I don't know if anybody wanted to add anything to it.
I think the discussion around tonight is what Kelly just went over. We want to try to fine tune which ones we can focus on without any legislative action and put kind of a plan in place. And maybe it's not us putting a plan in place, but asking the UD team to research what a plan could look like that we could then put into place. If it's a group that does it, the cost of that, the timing of that, the delivery of that, those are all things that need to be thought out. So just throwing that out there for the group.
So Noel, I'm going to turn it over to you.
So we're gonna create some breakout groups so that we can work in small groups, and we'll share a Google Doc link in the chat that everyone can access and that we can fill in together while we're in the breakout groups. The goals are to really think about priorities of the recommendations, implementation plan of like how we would actually do this, some stakeholder engagement, and we can also kind of discuss any problems that might arise. Ray just brought up as far as retention and recruitment of teachers in high need schools may be impacted by COVID. Those are some things that we want to think about as well. And Autumn had a question about DACTE, the Delaware Association for College of Teacher Education, if we have collaborated with them. I don't remember that, but we appreciate that. So we can add that to our notes.
Okay, so I'm going to figure out how to break everybody into their small groups and put the link into the Zoom chat. Give me 1 second. We're going to break into groups of 3 different groups.
Yeah, and if you don't have access to the Google Doc, we're going to put somebody from the planning team into each group. So they're going to be like a note taker. So if you're not someone who wants to multitask or you're not at a computer, that's okay.
Oh my goodness. Hold on.
I just put this in the chat, but I do have to jump. And I wanted to say to everybody, thank you for your time. And I look forward to the next convening.
Thank you for being here, Autumn. And we may, bring you some questions afterward, specifically about like the definition of high quality teacher. I'm sure Relay had some input on that as well. And we appreciate you being here.
Yeah, happy to be here. And I can definitely share my thoughts via email if that's needed.
Great, thank you.
All right, so I'm going to attempt to put you all in a room. Hold on, Secretary, I'll get you in a room. Sorry about that. Oh, there we go. right, 2 of us made it back. Up, 4 of us.
This is just like face-to-face PD. Trying to get everybody back.
They're all probably like, why is she bringing us back in? Because we have to go back out again. Oh, everybody's coming back.
Yep, here we go.
Awesome.
But not taught by anyone.
Sorry, Ray, they cut us off. We're back in the big group.
Okay, well then I guess I'll come back in. The
Sorry.
term teachers of color is too ambiguous. It doesn't specify what the need is for Wilmington.
I agree.
And I'll finish my comments in the larger group.
We're slowly getting everybody back. Do we have everybody? I think we do. So, Noelle, I'm gonna turn it back to you. It looks like everybody put in their recommendations on the left, which ones they thought we should hit upon.
Yeah, it would be great if we could have a spokesperson from each group, and also anybody can really chime in about why you chose that one and what were the key points from your discussion that should be shared with the main group. I heard Ray was just sharing one as far as changing the wording with teachers of color, which we haven't done yet, but I agree with that as well.
Hey, Noel, I'm not going to be able to keep my speaker open because of the background noise, but can I just share really quickly with you and you share it with the rest of the group?
Please.
Okay, so the whole notion that how much of a difference does it make for kids in the city of Wilmington to have some teachers that look like them throughout the course of their career. This is well researched across the country, the impact of African American children having African American teachers. And so for me, and then also the notion that if we incentivize people with dollars, I mean, I've seen that over the last 20 years and they don't stay. So for me, I think that it's really going to be important for us to dig a little deeper. If we take these recommendations and put them in a different kind of setting, not focusing on Wilmington, do they really say what needs to be said, or are they really calling for the changes that need to happen specifically for children that live in the city of Wilmington? That's my comment.
So I hear what you're saying, maybe Ray, that we have to be very explicit in our languaging to make sure that someone outside of the city of Wilmington takes these recommendations and that we can actually get the results that we were talking about when somebody's outside of the context. For example, changing that term teachers of color to saying Black and Latinx teachers and Black male teachers, if that's what we're looking for representation. Is that kind of what you're saying? As an example.
I am, and also in the strategy section, there are strategies that can be deployed to increase the numbers in an intentional way that I don't believe that we have tested in earnest.
So being really detailed about the strategies that have been successful in other places that we think may be successful. And I'm curious also what your thoughts are on getting more feedback from teachers of color who are already in the profession about retention, because as you were saying, the salary doesn't seem to be the thing that makes people stay, and the data showed that as well. But if teachers of color are leaving or not staying in schools or not choosing the profession, why is that?
Is there, was there, with the way we got the DOE data originally, were we able to break it down further demographically to know, like we learned that leadership was the #1 reason they either left the profession or went to another school district we couldn't really identify. But #2 was school safety, and there was others, right? Is there a way we can break that down demographically to kind of to figure that out?
I asked that question in the meeting, Mike, if they could break it down by race, and they said no, because they didn't have a large enough sample size. So if they broke it down by race, it wouldn't actually be representative because there would be such a small number of people. So we might have to survey that again or find another way to engage stakeholders, or to even ask, like, if we put these strategies in place, would that have an effect on your choices to stay in a job or take a job teaching?
Okay. Yeah, I guess for our sample size specifically, they had good responses, but that was statewide, so that makes sense.
So asking teachers that are in the profession, that have been in the profession for, whatever the threshold is that people agree to, and the central question is, what keeps you here? Like, money will bring you, but it won't keep you.
Yeah, and the data reflects that as well. And Kelly just put in the chat, it looks like everybody agreed with recommendation 1, which was grow our own, right? And 4, which was the individualized learning package for a high needs school with a price tag. And then 3 and 5 were up for discussion. So any thoughts that people want to weigh in about why they made their choices, points that you think are particularly important?
I would say in our group, we had a good discussion about number 3, which I just want to be sure I'm referring to the right one. Number 3 is about the incentives, right? Yes. So I think we were all on the same page that we agreed that money isn't the sole motivator and it's not, long lasting. But when we talk about wanting to inspire more of our youth to consider education as a profession, like we've got to start all the way down in middle school in these teacher academies when they're making decisions as to which career path to sign up for. We've got to inspire them then. And so unfortunately, I think a lot of our youth tend to look at the dollars. They want to be sure that they get their return on investment once they graduate. And so sometimes education may not be top of mind, but if you show them that there's some type of financial incentive, loan forgiveness, tuition assistance, something that makes now college more of a possibility for them, then that's where we feel you can get them into the profession. I think that's the first step. It's hard then to tie them to Delaware for X number of years. I mean, I don't think we want to be like the military where you have to sign for a certain commitment in order to get a certain package. But I think getting them into the profession is the first step. I think we all win as a community, as a society, if we get more people into the profession. Obviously, they're going to gravitate to the communities that they are most comfortable with, but at least get them into the pipeline first.
So in our group, we had a similar conversation and we talked about 1, 2, and 3, but we gravitated to number 1. And we saw these as connected. We had conversation around how these are actually very closely connected. And also there was some conversation about why, when we created these, we chose to separate them. But we gravitated toward number 1, developing our own Grow Your Own program, because we saw that as something that was ready for us to take advantage of, that a lot of districts are talking about this already. Some have moved along and have efforts underway. There's different ways you can certainly approach a Grow Your Own program, but we thought there were aspects of that, a particular recommendation that could happen right away. It could also happen without too much of a price tag. Of course, there's ways that you can strengthen or grow your own program with incentives that do come with a price tag, but we thought there was a way for us to be able to actually make movement in that area right away without legislative action, without a hefty price tag, and to just leverage the work that districts already have underway and help them strengthen those efforts. We also gravitated to 4 and creating a whole school professional learning package offered to high needs schools within Wilmington. And we chose that one because the time is now, the need is urgent. We saw that as something else that we really can't wait for, and something else that was probably doable. Also, a point was made in our group about how there is a real opportunity to be able to put the spotlight on teachers that are able to take these really challenging circumstances and still teach with equity-minded practices in mind, and are able to reach children and families. And so not only creating a whole professional learning package, but also finding where those teachers are that are really effective, and seeing how we can spread the word on what they're doing to help navigate these times too. So those were the 2. Of course, we could have picked a 3rd one, but we chose to just elevate those 2.
Thank you, Shelley. I wanted to share also, I think Ray has some sound issues going on, but she was saying as far as elevating the profession and compensating teachers competitively. And I was saying that the number 1, grow our own, is related to compensation, because if we're thinking about recruiting teachers from the community that may not have the luxury of taking a low-paying job, to think about that, growing our own teachers from the community, that they're also going to need to be compensated fairly and have a competitive profession in order to make a living.
Noel, they may also have loans that they have to be very concerned about, which would be a deterrent. But although it's not mentioned here, I think there's a thread through all of these that if we could raise the reputation of teachers in general, so that people admire teachers as maybe they once did, at least they did more fully. The profession now is not one that is always praised and valued to the extent that we would like it to be. We tend to be up for criticism. Education as a whole is often criticized. So if we can do something with the public image, I think that would also help us draw more people into the field, which is not one of our suggestions, but it's something that's cheap to do.
Well, I think one thing that we need to be cautious of, especially, those of us on this consortium, is, I cringe when I hear somebody say that education is a low-paying job. It's not a low-paying job. It is a very rewarding profession, and the salary that is quoted is based on a 10-month contract, not 12 months. So the first thing we need to do is educate people to calculate the salary so that you're comparing apples to apples. But I think that's when we use those terms, that's what turns off our youth, because the minute they hear low-paying job, they're like, oh, nix that idea, I'm gonna go towards the money. And we've got to remind them, we've got to educate them that there's more to the profession than what they see on paper. They have got to calculate that salary so that they are comparing apples to apples.
Margie, I would add to that the benefit package, because they're usually those hidden benefits that don't come out in the actual salary line. But when you look at some of the other benefits that we have and the long-term pension plan that we have, that's something that other occupations don't always offer.
Agreed.
Thank you so much for sharing that viewpoint. And I think that ties into some of what we talked about with recruiting young people and from future educators of America, especially when we talked about those kinds of programs as well.
How early do we start talking to, you know, folks about those things that we just mentioned? Like, are those at fairs that people are hearing about that? Is it when they're in high school currently? Like, when do they hear about those things for the first time?
Mike, I know I can just speak up for my experience. I know when I teach my classes, I talk to them all the time about, preparing for job interviews and thinking about, these fairs where people are going to hand you contracts and being cautious of, that stuff. But I always tell them that, the benefits is the thing they should be looking at, even though it's long-term and down the road. That's the key. And I'm wondering, like, if, is it a financial incentive that hasn't been tried yet that might be considered? So for every X number of years you stay in, your salary increases by a certain percentage. And for every so many years you stay in, you deduct the number of years you have to stay in the profession to achieve a full pension. So if you're in there for 3 years, you can retire with a full pension at 28 years rather than 30 or something like that, so that you're trying to build in long-term incentives. But for the most part, I would say that the students who I teach, they're all thinking about the immediate moment. They're thinking short-term. So any long-term incentives would have to be coupled with short-term incentives as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, especially the data we saw that it was 3 years or less. So I think the short-term incentives would drive.
I apologize. I got kicked out and missed part of the conversation. So Kelly, thanks for getting me back in. It was all my computer. But one of the things, and I don't know if it got mentioned, that in our group that we mentioned was that when we talk about the professional developing, not to use mentoring, since we're requiring that for all new teachers, and those higher need schools, we're getting a lot of new teachers, making sure that the mentoring program isn't a one size fits all, that they get a different level of professional development. Mike, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I was actually saying something to my wife off.
Oh, okay. So I don't know if Margie mentioned that, because in the transition when I was omitted, but I think that we know that it's a different, they need a higher level and a different level of professional development. And if we could link that to mentoring, which we're making them do, but not making a one size fits all.
Okay. We'll spend just a couple more minutes on this, guys, and then move on to our next one. Anything else anyone had to add from the groups about this?
It sounded to me like there was kind of an idea to combine 1 and 2. I don't have the full recommendations in front of me, but that this is kind of making number 1 our focus maybe, but that 2 is related to number 1. And if we're good on 1 and 4, and we had some discussion of 3 and 5 as well. Was there anything else that anyone wanted to chime in that hasn't been said, as far as something we might not have thought of, or that might be different from what we said, that from your viewpoint, it would help us to figure out which ones to focus on? And then we're going to go into our breakout groups again to fill in a little bit more of some ideas here. We don't have to finish today, but to start thinking about the details of how to implement these top suggestions.
I mean, I won't speak for Jim and Fran, but I think that if the number 1, grow our own, if I heard Shelley correctly, if that incorporated incentives and things like that already, then I think that our group would actually agree that 1 should be 1. I think we're the group that said 3 as being number 1. So I think that we're more closely aligned than is reflected in this table.
We talked about how this could be the start of it, but if you look at this in terms of phases, then it starts a little bit more of where we are and with the resources we don't have to invest, but then it would move into that, say in year 2 or 3. That's how we were thinking about it.
One of the questions that came up in our group too, I thought was interesting, was when we speak of a grow your own program, are we talking about a program at the state level, the city level, the district level, the school level? And a corollary to that would be, do charter schools typically have the the bandwidth to develop their own grow your own schools, especially those that are like K-5 or K-8? So the scope of a grow your own program needs to be thought about a little bit here, I think.
When you say that, are you talking about growing from the students? Because I thought the Grow Our Own program was focused on recruiting people from the community and not necessarily from the students in the school.
I'm just sharing out a question that came up in our group.
Okay.
So there's a question about that I think we need to ground.
Yeah, no, well, we were just confused. When you say grow our own, like when we think about aspiring administrator programs, I think most districts have sort of their own program for aspiring administrators. We didn't know if this idea was one where each district and charter would then have their own grow your own type of program, or are we trying to do something collectively so that, as a county, as a state, we're actually building on those pooled resources as opposed to everybody doing their own thing.
I think when it comes to Wilmington, larger districts will probably think about this in terms of growing their own from bring our teachers up from the teacher academy, send them off to school, bring them back to the district. But I do think it's worth our time and energy to think about what that would look like for smaller systems. It would make complete sense for charters to bond together and think about grow your own as a collective in Wilmington. Just like if we were talking about Sussex, I know the focus here is on Wilmington, but if we were talking about Sussex, it would make complete sense for tiny districts downstate to bond together. But right now, while we're modeling Wilmington, maybe some charters would do that so that because even if they call themselves growing their own, the opportunities may not always be there in their district in that year. But if they're doing it together, there could be some kind of coordination that led to something fair that allows them to do it together.
Shelley, I think that's a good point. It depends on size.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We can look into that and bring to the next meeting anything additional from what we have in the recommendations as well. So. Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's good to note, like you were saying, as far as like whether it's the grow our own from, I just keep thinking of like Jackie, who was in our meetings in the beginning from Eastside Charter, who was there in a support position from the community, invested in the community, and then was given resources to train to become a teacher, and she really wanted to stay there and continue to invest in the community. So that's I think the motivation of that program, a lot of, is that instead of bringing people from outside who you have to train to understand the families and the students in the community, if you lift up people from within the community to become teachers. So we have about 20 minutes left. 1 and 4, it sounds like we're focusing on for right now. And I'm wondering if we can do our breakout groups again just for 10 minutes to fill in some of our ideas. And I would suggest that we just kind of brain dump everything that we're thinking about and not worry about editing it too much, because we can come back to it when we meet again in August. In between now and in August, you'll have more time to think about this and share your ideas. So we can just get the conversation started and then we come back and regroup for the last few minutes and talk about next steps.
What I'll do, I know, I saw people put some notes in here. I'm just going to make a row for 1 and a row for 4. And then you can move whatever you need to up into 1 and 4, and we can all just brain dump as we go. So I will do that while I break you out into your breakout rooms. If I can find my... Sorry, my computer is...
How much
frozen.
time will we have here? Until what time?
10 minutes.
10 minutes.
So Very slowly coming back. Let's see. All right, I think, oh, Jim made it back too. And Mark, there's Margie, sorry. You're on a different part of the screen earlier, so we're all back. So, Noelle?
So we were talking about really fleshing out the ideas for implementation more in August. We have a lot of ideas here, and I'm thinking Kelly can share that back out with everyone, as well as, you know, kind of share out the dates for what we're going to be looking at for the fall meetings and kind of the timeline. So I'm thinking that for August, we're really wanting to follow these next steps of who each person is going to reach out to get stakeholder input. And then we can really flesh out the implementation plan in August if we've already gotten some input from some of the people on this list, like, you know, the HR directors from alternative routes programs like Relay, HBCUs, CTE programs. Right. So.
And we can talk as a group and we can pull what we have as well. I know we, IP have done some, we haven't necessarily engaged these groups, but we have some of the information that we can use to base our conversations and engagement off of with them.
I think that we can organize the next steps probably by email if everybody's okay with that. We can do that electronically. And then just in these last few minutes wrapping up, just clarify any questions that people might have that they would need answered before we can move on to getting that stakeholder feedback before our next meeting.
Cool. Well, thank you everybody for joining tonight.
Can I just jump in really quick, Mike?
Yep.
Sorry, I meant to do that. I was giving everybody a second. So just so you all know the timeline that we are working towards for the final recommendations. In August, we have a consortium meeting, August 13th, but I can double check that. That just came out. That came out a couple weeks ago from Haley. We will have an October meeting as a full consortium where we will be asked to share the recommendations, where they are, how far we, as complete as possible, to get any feedback, kind of like we did at the last iteration, answer any questions they may have, so that in December, as we meet as a full consortium again, the consortium can vote on them to approve and start moving them forward. So in the meantime, between now and our next meeting, I will try not to flood your emails too much, but emails from me, Mike, Noelle, possibly Abby, Fran, just as follow-ups to what we need and getting everybody going. And Tizzy did confirm the 13th. Sorry, it's getting really warm in here. So that is where we are.
Cool. Thanks, Kelly. Well, I appreciate everybody being on tonight. I know it's hard to kind of re-engage on some of this stuff since we met in March and a lot has changed since then. But thank you everybody for your time and commitment to doing so. I know there's a lot of homework to be done behind the scenes now for our next meeting, but appreciate everybody's input today. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and Noel, and we can help navigate you from there. All right. Hope to see everybody in person sometime before 2021, but I doubt it. So.
Thank you.
Everyone have
Thank you,
a good night.
everybody.
Thank you.
Welcome,
Thank you all.
members.
Nice seeing you all.
See ya.
Bye, thank you.
Good night.